Hello class, this is the first context lesson for Pysanka and Begin Again. So our core information, the ethnic group we are discussing are peasants, and what we are discussing are Pysanka eggs, like the image you see here. Our location is Eastern Europe, our time period is 1313. Our why and purpose is fertility, and how they are dyed and inked. So the group that we're discussing are peasants, and in particular the peasants of Eastern Europe. They were the common people of the area. They farmed and grew crops and herded animals. They did not own their own land, but they worked on the land of nobility, or later on the government. And then they received a share of what they produced and a place to live that was sufficient, not super nice, but just okay. And the peasants were usually poor. And over on the right, you see a photograph of a peasant woman. This is the early 1900s, and she is carrying firewood on her back. On her head is a babushka. That's what that is called. Part of my family, my father's first wife's side is Polish, and everybody wore babushkas. The whole time I was growing up, they all bushka'd. So our location is Eastern Europe, and that's a hard area to define. You can kind of see it here on the map. It's surrounded by seas, the Adriatic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Baltic Sea. There are also ranges of mountains, the Caucasus Mountains, the Alps, the Urals, and the countries and borders change. They are always kind of coming and going even today. Some of these countries exist and then they don't exist and then they exist again. At times Russia took over large parts of them, especially the area of Belarus and the Ukraine, and then for a while they were part of the USSR, which was the United Soviet Socialist Republic, and behind the Iron Curtain. But since the Cold War is over, there is more access. The climate of these places, it's variable, but they are pretty much all known for very cold winters with lots and lots of snow. So fertility, spring, and eggs. And because the peasants were farmers, the weather seasons of fertility were very important to them. Springtime was celebrated because of the return of the sun after a long cold winter, the beginning of planting season, and the birth of all the new animals. One of the earliest signs of spring was the increase in egg production. And over here on the right, you have another art form from the area. This is a paper cut, where paper is cut out into a design and layered with other pieces of paper that is cut out. The mythology of this area is important as to explaining eggs. In this area, Dezba was the sun god and the hero. This predated Christianity. And he was associated with eggs because the yolk of the egg resembles the sun, and because only birds could fly high enough to reach him. And over on the right, you have a more modern illustration of this guy. So he was a hero as well as being a god. He would come down and have adventures and whatnot. He's wearing the traditional costume of the area, the big fur hat, and the long tunic, and all of that. Below hand, you see hay stalks, and then kind of a hayman, and these haymen would be built and then burnt as a way to create the fire and the light and the sun. And that would usually happen in summertime. So spring festivals, though, eggs were given as gifts. It was a very important part. eventually they began to be dyed red, which was a color that was associated with love and fertility. And think about it, we still associate the color with love because of Valentine's Day, and think about the colors. Then eventually the plain red eggs were decorated at first with simple dots and lines, and then they started to become complicated designs and other colors were added. Certain games were played, like egg tapping and egg hunts. A long time ago, these were ways of finding a partner for courtship. Pysanka are the colorful, highly patterned eggs, and they're created with a combination of drawing with hot wax and dyeing, and they've replaced the plain red eggs. Artificial Pysanka eggs were made of ceramic and stone, and these have been found dating back to pre-Christian Europe. So eggs like you see on the right, the color is worn off. We know that it was colored very brightly at one time because of the way you can molecular examination, but you see how the lines are carved into the stone. The real eggs from this time did not still exist, so there is drawings and written records of them because they eventually decayed. The symbols that Pysanka eggs are based on are fertility symbols, including plants, animals, love, family, and religion, and ruins. And the word Pysanka comes from the word that means writing. And over here you see somebody making a Pysanka egg. She is using the hot wax to draw on the egg. So the areas that you see black is actually the carbonized wax, and when she dyes the egg, those areas will be white when the wax is wiped off. The tool with the stylus, it's a funnel that leads down to a sharp point, so it works a lot like a pen, but it's kind of difficult to use because you have to keep your wax hot constantly, and it cools fast, and then you're drawing on this curved surface. So when Eastern Europe adopted the Christian religion, and Eastern Europe is split between Western Christianity, which is the common type of Christianity in the United States, and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which is still here but not as common. The egg itself became associated with Eastern practices, and the egg was used to illustrate the story of the resurrection, and it was a symbol and an idea that the people were already familiar with. They already associated the egg with a divine being, and they already associated the yolk with the sun and fertility in springtime. The egg was adopted as an official symbol of Easter by the church in the year 1313. And this is a Pysanka egg that is decorated with a Russian church. So for your assignment, you need your materials, your Chromebook, and traditional or digital drawing materials. So your directions, I have a few resource videos linked on how traditional Pysanka are made. And then I want you to do some searching. So Google examples, images of Pysanka to see how they look. Choose your favorite one and then draw it and color it. And turning in, you're uploading a photo. You may want to use a ruler. If you don't have a ruler, use the straight edge of a piece of paper to get some of the straight lines. But just give it a go. Can't wait to see them.